Well, what's up again, guys? Brian here at 3TR, here to present to you another one of my top list videos to share with you guys today. Now, in order to celebrate the release of the newest installment in my all-time favorite fighting franchise of all time, Mortal Kombat 10, I felt the need to just go back and share what are my personal top 5 favorite Mortal Kombat games in the franchise to date. Now, like always, this list is my own personal opinion, so don't feel too bad if there's a certain installment that you feel should be on this list but isn't, but is on your list. So, starting off real simple with number 5, I picked Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks. Now, it's always a bit of a hit and miss when a franchise decides to change up its gameplay format and kind of venture off from the status quo. And I think that Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks was one of the exceptions. I think going away from a standard fighting game to kind of a beat-em-up game, something like Streets of Rage, I think there was a welcome format. You played as only Liu Kang and Kung Lao, hence Shaolin Monks. And I think that it was a good experiment for its time. I'm not going to say it was good enough to the point where I'd like to see a sequel, but if you really were going to compare Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks to all the other games and other franchises that tried to venture off from its original gameplay format, I think Shaolin Monks would undoubtedly be one of the better games of this type of changing up the format style games. And that's why I feel like I have to add it as number 5 on this list. Going on into number 4, I have to go old school with this one, and I'm picking the original Mortal Kombat. Now, the original Mortal Kombat was as simple as you could get, and it really is the root to which all Mortal Kombat games ventured from. I mean, it had only 7 characters, it was no digital actors, and the fact that it was made with such a small team, and that game would have such a massive impact on not just the gaming community, but the general community in general. I mean, this was one of the most goriest, grittiest, and most violent games to date that anyone had ever seen, and it actually brought to the creation of the rating system that we now use to this day. So it's just the fact that Mortal Kombat in general has had such just a massive impact on our video game culture, and in my personal opinion, it helped spawn undoubtedly the best video game movie ever made. Some people like to argue there's a couple others, but yes, there is a good video game movie. And just for me, it's just the most basic of all the Mortal Kombat games. If you keep it basic, then you're guaranteed to have a very, very fun time. And that's why I feel I had to add the original Mortal Kombat on this list. And going on into number 3 is an installment that I know some people really don't like, but I think that it works out of what it was trying to do. And I picked Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. Now, in my opinion, Deadly Alliance was the first real solid attempt to take Mortal Kombat into a 3D dimensional plane, as it was with previous installments, which it had always been mostly done on a 2D plane. And there were definitely some pros and some cons about it. I mean, with the advantage of being in a 3D plane was that the fighting gameplay made it a little bit more challenging because it made it a lot easier to dodge attacks. It allowed you to be able to take up much more spatial area, but it also had its set of problems. It had a lot of really, really terrible characters, which are just why they decided to create them that way is unclear. It was nice that we got to see the fatalities in a much more digital format, as opposed to how it always been in the previous 4 games, had always been a little bit digital. Or pixelated, in my opinion. I like that it brought the crypt, which allowed us to see a lot of extras that up until this point we had never had a chance to do. So it was nice to actually get to see some old artwork, to see some concept art, or just see some special, really interesting videos that, you know, kind of work within the Mortal Kombat lore and are very entertaining to watch. And I also like that in terms of the combat system, this was actually the introduction of the multiple fighting forms and weapons. Up until this point, every character had a solid fighting style, and you had to learn their combos. But in this one, there were multiple fighting modes that you got to learn, and it allowed you to switch between these combos and allowed you to throw your opponent off. And this is something that they have somewhat added in Mortal Kombat 10. However, they've made it as separate variations instead of being able to switch with them on the fly, which personally, that's something I already don't like about Mortal Kombat 10 in general. But I think that out of the original Deadly Alliance trilogy, I know that, you know, Deception and Armageddon get bashed on a lot, but I think that Deadly Alliance really was the best installment, and it showed that although Mortal Kombat's not built for a 3D plan, it certainly can work if you do it right, and that's why I feel I have to add it as number 3 on this list. Going on to number 2, I picked Mortal Kombat 9. Now, this is undoubtedly, in my opinion, the best Mortal Kombat game I've played since my number 1 choice on this list. And it really brought Mortal Kombat back to its roots. It was a very, very well done, well-designed, well-developed, high-definition Mortal Kombat back on a 2D plane. It had an amazing cast of characters, and if you played it on PlayStation 3, it had my main man Kratos in it as a DLC character, which was awesome. And it had one of the all-time best, not just stories that I've seen in a fighting video game, but probably video game in general. I mean, they really went all out to create a real interesting story and allowed us to play as all the individual characters and see this story, this battle between the realms amongst all these very unique characters, and it allowed us to really get to see them shine when they had their chance. And I think that this is really going to continue in Mortal Kombat 10. And also, bringing in the X-Rays. The X-Rays is probably one of the best additions that any fighting game has ever added to its franchise, and it adds a whole new level of style of how you conduct and play with your certain characters. So it actually is more of a strategic game than just simply picking characters and just mashing buttons or memorizing certain combos. There's actually a particular way you should use your character, and I think knowing your character and knowing how to best use them is one of the best challenges of any fighting game, and I think that that has not been done any better, in my opinion, than in Mortal Kombat 9. But there is only one other game, in my opinion, that I still enjoyed a little bit more than Mortal Kombat 9, and that was Mortal Kombat 2. Now, Mortal Kombat 2 was the very first Mortal Kombat game I'd ever played, and can you imagine being a 5-year-old seeing some of those characters get killed in all these crazy ways? I mean, that game morphed me, and it was probably, in my opinion, the most balanced. I mean, in terms of gameplay mechanics, this was long before the combo system for Mortal Kombat 3, and I think that it had more characters, it had more variations of gameplay character designs. I think that in terms of the gameplay style, I think that at this point, all the characters certainly did play a lot more different. There were much more variations of races, and I think this was really the beginning of when Mortal Kombat was really starting to get into a A+ franchise for me. I mean, Jesus, I was only 5 at the time, so what did I know about franchises? But I think that out of all the Mortal Kombat games, this is the one that, in my opinion, was ahead of its time. All the other Mortal Kombat games, when they were released, I felt that they were the perfect type of game for its time. But for 1995, Mortal Kombat 2 was certainly way ahead of its time, and I don't think any other Mortal Kombat game has achieved that feat. Not even 10, in my opinion. I think 10 is a great game for our current gen of games, or the next gen, or current gen set of games. But I think that Mortal Kombat 2 was the only one, in my opinion, ahead of its time, and I still enjoy playing it to this day. It has still some of the best fatalities, and yeah, just some of the all-time greatest memories I've had with a fighting game in general, and that's why I feel I have to add it as number 1 on my list. And with that, those are my top 5 favorite Mortal Kombat games of all time. I'd really like to know, what are some of your guys' favorite Mortal Kombat games of all time? Share your list with me in the comments down below, and if you like this video, feel free to like, comment down below, and please subscribe to check out my future videos. And like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I'll see you next time.